Welcome back to the Sharp End Podcast, a podcast aimed at minimizing future outdoor accidents by way of storytelling. Real people sharing real stories. I'm Ashley, the creator and producer of this show. This show is brought to you by Rocky Talkie, a backcountry radio company based in Denver, Colorado. If you've been listening to the Sharp End for a while now, you know that I love my mountain radios. I use them on every single outdoor adventure I go on. Don't let poor communication be a contributing factor to an incident. And remember, Sharp End listeners get 10% off by going to rockytalkie.com/sharpend. I would never go into the backcountry without a device to assist in an emergency. That's why I partnered with Zoleo. Zoleo is a two-way messaging device that uses the Iridium satellite network for reliable coverage across the globe. You can clip this small device to your pack with a carabiner for easy access. It has location sharing and tracking features that are not yet offered by iPhones or other cell phones. Zoleo also offers weather forecasts, medical assistance, and has an epic battery life. We recently used this device on our fall moose hunt and were extremely impressed with it. Don't find yourself in a situation where you don't have an emergency tether. Get yourself a Zoleo and use discount code SHARPEND to save money by waiving the activation fee. For those who crave adventure as part of their lifestyle but don't let it define them, meet the Amazfit T-Rex 3, the ultimate ready-for-anything adventure watch. Whether you're hiking the trails, tearing down a mountain on your bike, or saying yes to that spontaneous night skiing invite, the Amazfit T-Rex 3 is ready for it all. It's more than just a smartwatch. It's your personal guide to exploration, discovery, and the thrill of the unknown. Stay on top of your health with advanced monitoring and experience the convenience of a cutting-edge AI personal assistant, complete with a built-in speaker to keep you connected and informed every step of the way. Adventure is calling. It's time to answer with the Amazfit T-Rex 3. Head to us.amazfit.com/sharpend for 15% off. May of 2023, Chris set out to rope solo Virgin Wool 5.8C2 in Arches National Park. The description of the first pitch read 5.7 sporty no pro, but to Chris, it looked harder than 5.7 from the ground, and he noticed a seam that he thought he could aid up. So he decided to try and aid climb the route. It didn't go as planned, and he ripped out 2 cams and fell 10 feet to the ground, landing on his heels before tumbling backwards. After a lot of self-reflection and therapy, Chris learned a bit about psychology of climbing solo and a bit more about risk management. I hope you enjoy.
Hey, Ashley. Thanks for having me on the show. My name is Chris Gardner. I am a 28-year-old guy from Golden, Colorado, and I am, kind of your average weekend warrior tech bro from Colorado. And yeah, this is kind of my story of kind of one of my big near misses in my climbing career. And if you're listening to the story for the blood and the guts and the helicopter rides and stuff like that, this isn't really that kind of story. I did get injured. I did have to go to the urgent care, but I mostly escaped severe consequences. But that was mostly due to luck and not any good decisions on my part. And if any of my partners are listening, I swear I'm a changed man. Hopefully you know that from dealing with me, and hopefully you'll understand that after hearing this episode. Yeah, so I'll get right into it. So, I've been climbing for about 6 years or so, and I've been trad climbing for around 3 years. And like all Front Range Coloradans, when spring and fall come, we head over to Moab and go to the desert. And I had taken kind of my first trip to Moab, 8 months or so before this incident, kind of instantly fell in love. And, I think, instead of going farther to Yosemite or Squamish or stuff like that, I've kind of just been to the desert 6 times for all of my climbing trips.
Oh my gosh, the desert's amazing. Indian Creek, Moab. Oh my goodness. Give it to me. Yes, please.
Yeah, I can't seem to find myself the willpower to drive any farther when, Moab and the creek are just...
It's right there.
Yeah, exactly.
So when did this happen? What year? What month and what year?
Yes, this was May 2023, so about a year and a half ago, and 3 or 4 trips to the desert ago. So this was kind of in the start of my like early desert career. I'd gone for like a couple trips, climbed in the creek once, climbed some of the other classics. And then I was about to take my like third trip to the desert. I on some of the previous trips, I kind of experimented with rope soloing and aid climbing in the desert because that was something that kind of appealed to me. Finding partners is always something that's been kind of hard for me, especially when, I'm driving 6 hours. I don't know anyone who like lives there. So it's either meet someone on a mountain project, bring someone with me or something like that. And most of the time I just didn't do that. And I relied on meeting people and kind of filled in the gaps with rope soloing, both like top rope soloing and lead rope soloing, which is kind of the focus and what this accent was about. And so I had rope soloed a couple things around Moab. I'd rope soloed a few more things around Colorado, and I was kind of getting ready to do my like first like big route. But first what happened is I went on this trip to Moab, and it was going to be like a quick weekend trip with a partner I've climbed with previously, and we were going to go climb North Chimney on Castleton Tower. The super classic.
It's such a good climb.
Most iconic formation in the world, in my opinion. I don't know.
It's up there for sure. It's so striking, and every handhold is just like boom, boom. I mean, I'm twos, like my hands fit perfectly with the number 2 Camelot, and that's just like pretty much sustained for quite a while. Like that is one of the most epic climbs I've ever been on. So I'm so glad to hear you say that.
It was awesome, although I did not end up climbing on this trip. So I went out, and this was supposed to be just like a quick 3-day trip. We were going to crag for a day, and we were going to hit Castleton Tower, and then, we'd like do some more cragging or something on the other day. I wasn't really planning on soloing at all, but I kind of thrown my stuff in the car just because it's, it's a big box of climbing stuff, and all the solo gear and the aid gear is in there, as well as all my cams and stuff like that. So I threw that in the car. And then I get to Moab, and we crag for one afternoon on like a Friday afternoon. I'd like worked remotely for a few hours. And then we went and cragged, and the cragging did not go super well. It went fine for me, but my partner was really not feeling climbing that day. She didn't really do super well in the cragging routes. And then she kind of decided at the end of the session that she did not really want to climb the next day. She was just feeling in really poor shape, not feeling good, and going on Castleton Tower, which is a huge route, really.
It's committing.
Yeah. Several hour approach for, the non-trail runners. And then, 4 pitches of reasonably hard climbing. She decided she was not up for that. And she decided she didn't really want to climb at all. And that she just wanted to like mountain bike the next day or something. So, totally fine, understandable. I was understandably like a little bit bummed. I had driven 6 hours to come do this awesome free climb that I was looking forward to, and didn't have a partner anymore. And it was like 7 p.m. And, that's kind of late to try and just like find a partner on a whim. And I didn't really feel like doing that. And I thought, well, I have all my like rope soloing gear and stuff like that. I'm just going to go rope solo something. And I was like looking at like my book of routes that I kind of like selected, like, oh yeah, what in here could I like rope solo? And ended up going with like one of my like not top choices for a route that I want to rope solo. This would kind of be like my first like big route that I rope soloed in the desert. I climbed like stuff like the Pickle, which is like a little 1 pitch aid tower, and I'd soloed that. And, soloed like a couple, like aided my way to the tops of like some free climbs, like a top rope solo them and stuff like that. But this was like going to be my like first big route. And I ended up choosing a route called Virgin Wool, which is in Arches National Park, and it's definitely not a classic. I wouldn't necessarily call it like an obscurity, but it's definitely like a less climbed route in the desert.
Why did you pick that one out of all of them?
Specifically because like the sun. It was like May. It was starting to get hot. I'm a huge diva about the heat.
You don't like being hot.
I hate being hot. Like I almost, so I love Golden. I love climbing around Golden, but in the summer I just like kind of shut down. I'm either like kayaking or something to get out of the heat. I can't stand the heat. So this climb, it was like east facing. So I figured, I'd get up there, I'd climb in the morning in the sun while it's cool, and then it would go into the shade, and, I'd be okay after that. And yeah, this climb is a little less well traveled than a lot of the other classics. And whenever in any climbing area, when you stray from the classics and maybe the second tier routes, you start to run into like bad rock quality, loose rock, maybe there's like holes that will break off eventually, but haven't broken off yet. And it's kind of true of any climbing area in the world. But I feel like in the desert, in my experience, that gradient in rock quality is particularly dramatic. And the moment you venture off of stuff that isn't climbed 100 times a year, you run into like mud and sand everywhere, and it's a little rough. And this climb particularly, Virgin Wool, is in Arches National Park. And the rock there is like the Entrada sandstone, which is like even softer and chossier than like the Wingate in Indian Creek and stuff like that. It really puts like the sand in sandstone. Very sandy. And this route kind of proved that rule of the desert being kind of chossy once you leave the classics. I feel like most people in Arches, they climb like Owl Rock, which is like the classic one pitch tower there, which is like 5'8".
Yeah, climbed it.
And
fun.
Yeah, 5'8", fun. And it sees like hundreds of ascents a year, if not like 1,000 every year. And so all the holds have broken off already. Mm-hmm. So I went up to this route. So basically, Friday evening, partner bailed on me. I'm like, all right, I'll go solo this. So Saturday morning, I kind of rock up to Arches, go get my permit, and drive to the trailhead. And this tower, it's on a formation called Sheep Rock. And also, I don't know if I mentioned this, the grade of it is 5'8" C2. So it's an aid climb. And the first pitch is like mostly free. And then it starts getting into the aid climbing after that. No, it's 5 pitches long. And it's like pretty close to the road. It's one of those weird desert approaches where if you walked in a straight line to the formation on crypto, it's like 5 minutes from the road. You have to walk through the washes and avoid the crypto and, travel responsibly in the desert. And so it's like a 15-minute approach, which is like pretty quick. But the point is, it's very unremote. You can see the road at all the whole time. It's on this formation called Sheep Rock, which, the road goes right by it. And like, it's the main, everyone who's driving in Arches drives right past it. It's near the entrance. And so I walk up to this route and I'm going to lead rope solo it. And so for people who aren't aware, for lead rope soloing, you have to build an anchor at the bottom of the climb. And then you kind of belay yourself up by attaching the belay device to your harness. And then one end of the rope is fixed to your anchor and you kind of like belay yourself. And then if you fall, you hopefully, the device catches you. That's the theory, at least. And so I built this anchor and I'm looking at this first pitch. And this first pitch was something that was I was most worried about because it is the free climbing pitch of the route. And on lead rope solo, I've kind of found kind of a huge baby when it comes to free climbing on rope solo. I'm like a fairly reasonably strong free climber. I've climbed 12A before. I'm not weak, but it's the mental aspect, even if it's like 5'6", 5'7" on lead rope solo, really freaks me out. And the topo of this route described the start of the first pitch as 5'7", sporty, no pro. And I'm like, all right, so it's maybe going to be like a free solo. And I get to the first pitch and I am kind of questioning the topo a little bit because I see that there's like a seam there that presumably will take like some level of trad gear. And I am like, all right, I would rather not free climb if I have the option to. I'm much more comfortable just like standing in aiders and being able to like, fully contemplate everything, move really, really slow. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to put my approach shoes on and get my aiders and I'm going to aid climb this seam instead of doing the first pitch. Because the first pitch, the topo says 5'7". I don't know, maybe some holes had broken off or stuff like that, but it looked a little bit harder, at least like less obvious than a 5'7" would be. So I decided to aid climb this. And I start aid climbing. I get like one good cam in. I think it was like a number 3. And then the seam like really tampers down and I'm into this like hard aid. And I don't know how I managed to turn like 5'7" free climbing into like C2 or C3 aid climbing. My like next piece was like a really crappy offset cam that held body weight, but it was a very weird placement where I couldn't get a tri-cam to stick. I couldn't get like a totem cam to stick. I had to use like the biggest offset cam they make in this like, I don't know, like bowl feature. And that was the only thing I could get to stick there. But that thing held body weight. And at this point, I'm maybe like 8 feet off the ground at this point. I really haven't gone very far. I placed 2 pieces, and with 8 climbing, each piece only gets you like a couple feet of vertical. And so then I get to place my next piece after this offset cam, which is really crappy. And the seam like really tampers down, becomes like more of a uniform crack. So I'm like not really worried at this point. I already feel like I've done the aid crux with this crappy offset cam. And I see this like thin seam, and I like take a 0.1 Z4 Camelot, which is like the second smallest cam that Black Diamond makes. And I stick it in this seam, and I don't really, one mistake I made is I didn't really like bounce test it that well. I kind of like stamped the aider on it and like yanked it around. But I thought it was like, oh, this is like a parallel seam. This is probably correct. And I step on it and weight it, and it holds for about 1 second, and then immediately it blows. And then, of course, that offset right below it immediately blows as well, and I take a fall. And I'm about, I want to say like 10 feet up. It's a little hard. I didn't get the ruler out or anything like that, but I would say I'm about like 10 feet up, and I take a ground fall. The next cam, with 2 cams out, the next cam is not really enough to stop me from hitting the ground. I hit the ground. I land like kind of on my heels, and then tilt backwards. And then finally, like my like self-belay system from the rope soloing engages, as basically, I'm kind of like falling backwards, and, my head and back are like a few inches off the ground. I'm kind of like, lying backwards. And I get a little freaked out, and I kind of like pull myself up, and I realize that my like heel hurts quite a bit. And it's not like a crazy amount of hurt. It didn't really feel like I'd like, shattered my calcaneus or whatever. I didn't feel like I'd really like broken anything. My heel like hurt quite a bit. And if that was the end of the story, what I should have done here is I should have like packed everything up and left, and, gotten that checked out like an urgent care. But for some very strange reason, I like kind of sat there for a bit with my cams and my hurting foot. And I realized, like, I was like kind of checking it out, examining myself. And I realized, it was kind of just my heel that hurt. And, I could still like kind of like toe onto the wall and like stand on, the little holds at the base of the climb with like no problem whatsoever. And for some reason, I managed to convince myself that my heel hurting is just not that bad, and I should continue on this climb.
Well, what was the reason though? Like, for some reason, you said that twice now, for some reason, but like, what was the reason?
I have some theories as to why I felt that way. I think, and I kind of, this is something that I've grappled with, is like why I continued on this climb for a while. Because I think, if I had been with a partner and I'd been the belayer and I saw my climber just fall and hit the ground and then like complain about their foot hurting, I would like, I'd be like saying, we're going now, I'm driving you to the urgent care. I'd be helping them hobble back to the car. But for some reason, when I was with myself, the little voice in the back of my head that, tells you not to do stupid things was just asleep at the wheel. And I was like, I can just, go along. I think maybe, there was no one to tell me to back down, and I wanted to do it. I'll talk more about my mindset as well later.
But I just want to stop right there because, like, yeah, like you would have done, and like, I just want to say this and then you can continue. But like, and I asked this to myself a lot too. Like, I would have treated somebody else a certain way, but I wouldn't have treated myself that same way. Like, I'll go buy my friend flowers who's having a really difficult time, but I would not buy myself flowers because I'm going through a really difficult time. Like, why do we treat other people better than we treat ourselves? And you don't have to answer that right now. I just think about that a lot myself. So I want you to think about that too, because you didn't do that for yourself. And the question is why?
Yeah, I think this climb it was something that I kind of wanted to do. And I think, I had this image, and I wanted to talk about later about the mindset of soloing. But, coming into this, I had this like image of myself as I'm a good climber. I'm good at rope soloing. I have mastery of like these technical systems. And I think, backing off would kind of shatter that self-image. And I think that's a big reason of why I went back on there, is because I would shatter this image of myself. And it took me a while to realize that that image of myself was not necessarily accurate. And, it was empirically proven that day. I clearly, many other things went wrong this day. But as I will get to eventually, but, it was empirically proven that I wasn't truly a super skilled climber in this scenario. I was in over my head. And confronting that required me to be like really uncomfortably honest with myself. But, getting back to the story. So I get back on this climb for, a myriad of reasons. I had something to prove to myself or something like that. I get back on this climb, and then I end up, I decide even still to try and aid climb this like crappy seam. And I actually placed the same offset, which holds fine. And then I end up bypassing this like really thin part of the seam. And I end up using a cam in a passive placement, which I've never done before, which is kind of cool. You can kind of place it behind something, and the lobes will like kind of hook onto something. And I kind of put it in this like slot and stepped up on that. And so I get to the top of this, and I feel like very victorious because I just climbed up this thing that I had failed to climb the first time. And I get to the next part of the first pitch. And the next part of this first pitch is this really disgusting 5/8 slab that is protected by bolts that don't have hangers on them. And it's just disgusting and sandy. And, like the bolts are not, the bolts are like kind of solid, but, the way you have to attach like a rivet hanger or something to them. And it's like tiny little piece of steel cable that's connecting to these bolts. And if you did fall, you're going to be like sliding down this like sandy slab. So I'm like kind of gripped going up this because I had just like fallen, and I'm climbing up this sandy slab that I don't particularly like. And I climb up it, and I definitely don't like send it. I'm definitely like stepping on these hangerless bolts and getting up there. And I get up to the top of the first pitch, and then I still have a lot of work before I'm done with the first pitch. In lead rope soloing, you have to lead the pitch, but then you still have all of your gear on the pitch. You still have the anchor at the bottom. So what you have to do next is you have to rappel down to the base, clean everything up, and then you have to reclimb that pitch on top rope in order to, clean the rest of the gear off, or to get back to, the anchor at the top of the pitch. And I decided, I just like jugged the pitch. I was A climbing, so, I had ascenders and ladders. So I just jugged it and cleaned all the gear off. And I get to the top of the first pitch and start the second pitch. And the second pitch has like the last free climbing move of the route. After that, it's like all aid climbing, which is kind of like more my comfort zone. I have to do one more free climbing move, which is described in the topo and in the route description as either a 5/8 mantle, or preferably stand on your partner's shoulders and get on top of this bulge. And obviously, I'm lead rope soloing. I'm alone. I don't have a partner whose shoulders I can stand on top of. So I am like, all right, this is, I can do like a 5/8 mantle. I'm not stoked at this point. My foot didn't really hurt at all while I was doing this because I was like standing on my toes while I was climbing the pitch. But then as I was like kind of walking around at the belay, I'm noticing my foot's like hurting like a little bit more. And I'm like not super stoked, but I'm thinking I'm going to continue. I'm going to prove this to myself. And so I start this 5/8 mantle, and I see some like little features to hold on to. And so I like step on an insecure foot, and I grab this feature that I see, which turns out to be not really a piece of rock, but more a piece of mud that immediately breaks. And I slip off this insecure foot, and I deck again at the belay. This one's like really easy. This was like, I fell like 3 feet. And I felt like I was like totally fine. But I'm like, wow, this is like a total junk show. Um, and I'm not thrilled about this mantle. At any point, there's a bolted anchor. I can rappel to the ground and one rappel from here. Like, there's nothing stopping me from bailing. And there was nothing stopping me from bailing at the bottom of the first pitch. All of my cams had like ripped out and were just sitting on the ground, and I could walk away at any moment, but I decided not to. And so I give this second pitch a second try, and this time I'm like, not all right. I won't use that like piece of mud over there. That's obviously like worthless. So I give the second pitch mantle a second try, and I step up and I fall again and hit the ledge that is right below me. And this time I had kind of like just like slid down slowly off of this like rounded bulge. And so it wasn't really a high velocity fall. But I hit the ground again, and I'm like landing on my foot this entire time. And it's like hurting a little bit more each time. And I'm still continuing onwards. I'm persistent. I have a really high tolerance for suffering is one of the things I found out from this climb. Great in the Alpine, but not necessarily helpful here. And so I try this mantle a second time. And this time I'm like, all right, I'm not really like freeing this. So I like get my backpack and I like stand on top of my backpack to like make my starting foot higher. And then I like reach my right foot really high and like stand on the bolt and of the anchor, and then do like a pistol squat on the bolt, and then kind of like flop on top of this mantle. And I finally like make it up. And then I'm like, cool, I made it. I'm done with the free climbing of the route. This is fantastic. And so I proceed to climb the rest of pitch 2, which was really awesome, actually. This is really cool horizontal traverse, all like C1 aid climbing. You're putting in like number 2s and hanging off of those, and everything feels like really bomber, and the rock quality is starting to improve. And there's like just 200 feet of air below you. So there's nothing even to hit if you do fall. And it's fantastic. And I climb that pitch, and I get to the anchor. And with a traversing pitch, you can't rappel that to get back to the other anchor. You have to climb all the way across. And then you have to, when you get to the other anchor, you have to get back to the top anchor. So you have to climb it 3 times. You're only placing the gear once on like the initial climb, but you're climbing it 3 times, and it kind of counts as like 3 pitches of like climbing in terms of like energy expended, because you're doing the like traverse moves 3 times each. And so I finish cleaning up, no issues. I lower out from the anchor, and I don't have to do a 5/8 mantle again, and I'm able to like jug up to my like first real piece, and then I like reclimb the traverse from there, and it's no problem. And I get to the bottom of pitch 3, top of pitch 2, and I'm looking up there, and it's in the shade at this point, but it's like, it'd take me so long to get up there. It's probably like 1 o'clock or something like that. And I had the hard aid pitches where I was going to be standing on like the smallest nuts I owned for like hours to go. And I was like, and it was still like pretty hot, even though I was in the shade. So I was like, all right, I'm over it. I got one cool pitch of like aid climbing. I'm over it. I'm going to rappel off. And so I rappel off, and then I get to the bottom, and I'm like walking around for more than like a few steps at a time for the first time that day. And I realized my heel is like definitely like, this is not just like, oh yeah, like a little bruise or something like that, or like a sprain or something like that. I'm like, I can't put like any weight on my heel. So I'm like, I coil the ropes, and I like hobble back to the car. It probably takes me like half an hour to do the 15-minute approach, because I'm walking super slow, and I'm walking like a wash. So, you're walking, it's like walking on the beach. It's not like great terrain to walking, even though it is kind of soft. But I still can't really put any weight on my heel, and I'm kind of just like walking on my toe, or on my right toe. My left foot is fine. I'm carrying 2 ropes, like a quad rack, and a bunch of other like aid miscellanea and stuff like that. And, I'm carrying like 4 liters of water, which I probably should have just like dumped out or something. But I'm feeling it. And so I kind of get back to my car and uh, am like, all right, my heels, like, it's not that bad. I can't like put weight on it, but I'm not like in pain, just like in general. So I kind of drive down to town and I'm pretty exhausted. And so I like get some dinner and then I kind of just like fall asleep in my campsite. And then the next morning I wake up and I decide, okay, let's be an adult for once and, go get this injury checked out. So I go to the urgent care in Moab and they take x-rays and they're like, well, we can't see any fractures or anything like that. So it's probably just a severe bone bruise of the calcaneus. And I'm like, all right, cool. So what do I do? He's like, yeah, just, don't walk on it for a month. And then, rest it, ice, all the usual treatments. And so I do that for like a month. And, a month goes by. I'm like hobbling around. I actually like get back to climbing, like top roping in the gym, like pretty quickly, because that just doesn't seem to aggravate anything. But I'm like hobbling around, and after a month, I'm not necessarily going to be hiking the AT or anything like that, but I can walk around and put weight on it, and it's totally fine. And I get back to climbing, and everything is like totally fine. And that's kind of the end of like the story. And it has always just kind of stuck out to me that, sure, the injury is like the least exciting part of that. But the psychology and the fact that I went back up there after injuring myself and I didn't really have like a plan for how I was like not going to get injured, like how I was not going to fall off again, has really like stuck with me, and like that, like the psychological aspects of it. And it made me scared of myself. I always had this image of myself as like, oh, I am, this really safe and skilled partner, and I'm not like a risk seeking person, I thought. And when I'm with a partner, I'm not risk seeking. I am super comfortable bailing. I'll bail if it's too windy. I've bailed on a route before because the pitch I just did was really awesome, and the next pitch looked kind of junky. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. And I bailed on it with a partner before. But for when I was solo, instead of being more risk averse because the stakes are higher and the margins are lower, something in my psychology went whack and I was taking more risks, which is like the total opposite of what you should do. And, I think part of it is like my mindset of like why I was soloing and like the route that I went for. And, I thought I was soloing because I was a really skilled climber and I had mastery of these technical systems and I was good at lead rope soloing. And the reality of that day is, I was soloing because my partner bailed on me and I was scared of finding like a new partner that day. And that was like a, kind of a bummer. And
the scarcity, it was scarcity. Like you had already driven so far. You were already there. You're a weekend warrior. You only have 2 days to get something rad done before your Monday starts again. So it's a scarcity factor, right? Like you're there, you've you've paid the gas to get there. It's your weekend warrior. So you have to do something because you're not going to get it until next weekend.
Absolutely. And I don't normally go out to Moab for like a weekend. Like 12 hours of driving is a lot for like a weekend trip. And so, I had the scarcity, and, I had this image of myself that I was like super serious, and I really should not have like stepped on that route at all that day. If I wanted to do something solo, I'm never going to tell anyone like not to solo. For me, like being alone in the mountains can be like a very spiritual experience. And I feel like it's very different, and it is fulfilling in ways that climbing or being with a partner is not. But you should also match your objective that you're soloing with like your mindset. So if you're like soloing because, you don't have a partner, maybe there's like some easy ridge climb you can go do and like free solo or something like that. Or you can do something that's like really easy. There's plenty of scrambling around Moab to do if you want to. That's like much safer to do than tackling like a 5-pitch C2 aid route with loose rock and ground fall potential. And you should really match like your goals to your mindset?
It's tough. I mean, I totally hear you and agree with you. And I just want to add that it is, being somebody who does do a lot of things in the mountains solo, um, it's tough to find partners. And it's also really important for me, and sounds like you, to find our edge and to push what we think our perceived limits are. That's kind of a fun, interesting thing to learn about ourselves. So yeah, it is more dangerous to go in the mountains by yourself, but it's also really beautiful. So, were you wrong by climbing that route?
I think I was. I think this was a you don't know what you don't know situation. I was not really aware. Like this was my first like desert route that I'd done that wasn't like really well traveled, which I was talking about before. I wasn't aware like how loose the rock would be, and I wasn't really experienced enough in the aid climbing, I think, to realize that seam was sandy enough that it wouldn't really hold a tiny cam. I was wrong, but it was also like I don't think I would have not gone on, or there's not a world where I didn't go on that climb because I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't really. I kind of, I have had mentors for a lot of my climbing career for like learning to sport climb, learning to trad climb, but the aid climbing and the lead rope soloing, I'd kind of all learned on my own. And I've got like books, like I've got Andy Kirkpatrick's Me, Myself, and I book. I've got Pass the Pitons Pete book, which talks about aid soloing a lot. And I learned a lot from like books and learned a lot from like practicing and like climbing like single pitch aid routes. But I just wasn't really ready for that level of aid, I think.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you've come to that conclusion. Because no one's gonna get you there except for yourself, right? Like no one can say, Chris, you weren't ready for that. Why did you do that? It's you that has to be like, wow, was I ready for that? And question yourself, and get yourself there. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah. I also, one thing is I just didn't know how I would react in like a solo situation when, crap hit the fan. I wasn't, it was just rough that this was my first like bad thing that happened while I was soloing, really. Like I'd free soloed up the flat irons and stuff like that. No problem whatsoever. I'd free soloed up some single pitch, or rope soloed up some like single pitch routes, no problems whatsoever. And then, part of it was like luck. My like first bad thing that happened on a route with loose rock and ground fall potential. I didn't really know how I would react in that kind of situation until it happened. And it turns out I react kind of weird and I don't necessarily act in the safest way, as I found out. And I decided to get back on stupid routes for stupid reasons. So,
well, what else did you learn?
So I learned like quite a few like strategies from this scenario. Like what I was talking about earlier with if I'd been climbing this as a team of two and I'd been the belayer and I watched my climber fall off this route, I would have acted like completely differently. And so like one strategy that I've had that has really served me well, both when soloing and like not soloing, is like kind of disassociating from situation and just imagining, I am the belayer and I'm watching myself be the climber. And also maybe, I'm the scaredy cat belayer who's like really nervous and, like the secondary partner in the party, like the less experienced one. And, thinking about, okay, how would I manage this inexperienced partner? I'm just pretending to be that belayer. Let's see, I think with rope soloing specifically, my decision to rope solo did not affect the ground fall, really. In most rope solo situations, you fall like a little bit farther than you would with a belayer. Just, due to the nature of how the devices worked and the fact that you have like a static anchor rather than a belayer who can manage slack. But this wasn't, I didn't fall and hit the ground because of the rope solo system. I popped 2 cams. I was 10 feet off the ground. I was 5 feet above my last piece of gear. Like maybe if my belayer had like ran backwards, they might have been able to arrest the fall. But I fell on, the fall was not caused by the rope solo system. But there were also things I could have like done to maybe like mitigate that more. I was using a Beal rope, which they have the property where they stretch more than other ropes, which has the advantage of they transmit like less force to the anchor because they stretch more and absorb more of the force. We also fall a little bit farther. And I was also using a Wild Country Revo as my belay device. And just a quirk of those is they slip quite a bit before they catch your fall. And those are, things I've thought about since then, because I wasn't really concerned about fall distance before this incident. And now I am very concerned about fall distance. And then, also about rope soloing in general, part of the reason like I'm here is I've seen just a lot of more like casual attitudes towards rope soloing online and like discussion boards and something. And a lot of people I feel are kind of approaching it like a little bit too quickly and before they've mastered like other parts of climbing. Like I think if you're trying to like rope solo on trad routes, the problem with that is that, with both leading trad and rope soloing, there's like a lot of different things to keep track of. And, there's a concept called like the mental stack, which is like how many things you're keeping track of at one time. And there's a limit to how many things you can focus on at one time. And there's people who don't have like that much experience leading trad, and they're still in kind of the like fiddling with gear phase of leading trad that are then going out and lead rope soloing, where you have to like manage backfeeding, you have to manage your backups, you have to manage your cash loop. You have so much to manage. My concern is that, if trad leading is new to you and rope soloing is new to you, that's too many new things at once, and you're not going to be able to manage all of those at one time. And you really should get to the point where like leading trad at least is like very intuitive, and you're like, you're putting your hand on the crack, you're noticing exactly what size it is, you're grabbing the right cam the first time, you're sliding it in there, you're clipping it. And then you can, once you're at that point, it's all very instinctual. Then you can graduate.
Yeah.
And, if you're climbing, like if you're rope soloing like sport climbs, I think certainly you should have some experience with sport climbing as well before graduating to rope soloing, but there's a lot less complexity there. And so, I'd recommend starting, if you're looking into getting into lead rope soloing, starting out on sport climbing is my recommendation, unless you're already an incredibly strong trad climber who's been placing gear for years or something like that. Some other stuff, I feel like you've talked about this one on the show a lot. Calling for help when you are injured and solo. If you're going to use an inReach, the inReach has to be accessible to you. In my case, the inReach was not accessible to me, and it was in my backpack, which is, like 10 feet away. And if I had like seriously, broken legs or something like that and couldn't physically crawl to the backpack, I would have been screwed. And I think, this route was like pretty close to the road, but I'm not really convinced that if I had been like screaming on the ground, if anyone would have actually like come. I think there was like enough vegetation in the way, and, it's the Arches National Park Road it's like a highway, there's tons of cars coming down all the time with tons of noise. I don't think anyone would have heard me if I was screaming, and I didn't have cell service at the base. And so if I hadn't, if I had been more seriously injured and needed to get to my inReach, that could have been a quest. And so now my inReach is always on my person. And ideally.
And some people, what I've learned on the show is that carabiner that comes on the inReach device isn't super strong, I guess. And so some folks have just replaced it with a locker. I've been using a Zoleo device lately, and I actually I used to have, and I still have an inReach, but I use Zoleo now, and I love that product very much. So and it also comes with a carabiner they can clip onto your backpack. So check that out.
Yeah, I keep mine inside my like chalk bag. I have like a chalk bag that has like a big pocket in the bottom of it, made by I think Tufa Climbing, which is now defunct, unfortunately, as far as I know. But they made these cool like multi-pitch chalk bags that had like a gigantic pocket in the bottom. I fit my inReach, fit my knife, I fit some like tape, and you probably fit some other goodies in there too. But it was really cool, and that thing, I feel like that's less likely to explode. I've heard also like, gear loops on harnesses explode sometimes, especially when you're like, if you're rope soloing, there's times in rope soloing where you actually attach stuff to a gear loop that might get like weighted. Like I've seen this, I saw this the other day on like someone's post. They had their like micro traction to manage the cache loop attached to their gear loop. And if the backup, and they had backup knots below the micro traction. And if the primary device fails and they need the backup knot is going to slam into the micro traction that's attached to the gear loop. The gear loop's going to explode. Anything else on that gear loop is gone forever. And then you fall, and then hopefully they all jam into one big mess on the primary, and hopefully nothing breaks. I wouldn't really want to test that. So yeah, but like I feel like lead rope soling, like that's one of the places where potentially gear loops could explode. So don't do that. Having your inReach on there, yeah, and just the added. I feel like this made me like respect soloing just in general, free soloing or rope soloing a little bit more, because I was so close to having that be so much worse. If I had been like a couple feet higher, I would have shattered my femur or something like that, I feel like. And the ground that I fell on was like sand. It was like compacted sand and kind of soft. And if I'd fallen on like slick rock or something else like that's on the base of other climbs in the desert, maybe that would have shattered my femur or something like that. And so this was just like a big near miss. And I realized that there's like a lot of scenarios that, are survivable or even like trivially survivable with a partner that if you're by yourself are like much, much worse.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing your story. And thank you for listening to this podcast. Thank you to Rocky Talkie, Zoleo, and Amazfit for sponsoring this episode. Make sure to check out the new videos up on the Sharp End Podcast YouTube channel. And if you want more content, head on over to Patreon to sign up. There are so many bonus episodes you can learn from exclusive to Patreon supporters. And as always, remember, play hard and be smart.